Oh. Easy, easy. Well, thank you very much, James, for the great introduction. He's recently invited me to the James Guild, which I didn't know was a thing, so now we can just take over the world. It's great. James's will be everywhere. And actually, my team is Joe, Jamie, James, and Jay, as well as a few others, but they don't count because they don't begin with J, so we'll just start from there. So what I really want to speak about today, other than some hilarious naming, is actually some kind of hilarious expectations we have building in crypto, which is that we're going to use Frankenstein's technology stack, right? We're going to bring all these things together to try and make a crypto dApp. Now, I really hope that today is going to resonate with a lot of people who are builders in this space. And, I really want to talk about some things that maybe we can do, and I'd love some more kind of Q&A at the end with any ideas of what we can do to kind of alleviate these kind of key issues. So everyone starts building a dApp with something really, really simple. They start with Ethereum blockchain, RPC, and then maybe some simple user experience, some JavaScript. That's how it should work, right? So this is what you want to do. But you start here, and then something happens. Maybe you need some historical data. You need to see something over time. Or maybe you need a data source from somewhere else. Maybe you're building a lending market. So now you need to bring in an oracle. So now you need to go and negotiate with an oracle provider, bring those in. Luckily, nowadays, there are a lot of oracle providers. This is a really good thing. But this is a real complexity in terms of building something, is that now you have to integrate yet another protocol just to know the price of something. So your little dApp that started off with, okay, I can run my Ethereum node at home, I can host my UI, now I need an oracle provider as well. So now I need to go and negotiate with, say, Chainlink or Redstone, etc., and get them to come onto the chain that I operate on, and also pay them, etc., which is an off-chain transaction, and I need to subscribe and all these things. So you end up needing some history. You end up needing some context to give your user and to give the user experience. So you end up using something like a subgraph, either hosted or on the decentralized network. And this is kind of, again, something that should be really easy, but is not, right? So RPC is really good at grabbing like one piece of information at one time. It's really, really bad at grabbing every single block across time of all the data. And actually, you'll find that most wallets, which have the little RPC provider inside them, they usually are a free RPC. So if you make too many calls, your app will just stop, right? And you saw this actually in DeFi Summer, where people were using very simple tools. I don't know if you remember, like VFAT tools to view their positions in all these different chains, but it was making so many requests on RPC, it would just stop halfway through. And you're like, this is a horrible user experience, and it's way outside of expectations. So things like subgraphs do alleviate those issues. Now, something that's becoming increasingly more important in terms of your protocol, your protocol's growing now, right? You've got some TVL in your lending market, in this example. It's growing. How are you going to show to your stakeholders, be those token stakeholders or equity and investors in a normal business, or even to your users, that the platform they're using actually is useful to other people, not just them? You need to show like the TVL, right? So things like DeFi Llama are really good for this, but you're probably going to want your own dashboard. So you're going to head on over to Dune, to Flipside Crypto, etc. You're going to want to then build your dashboard in SQL, and this is yet another integration, right? And for example, if Dune doesn't support your chain, or Flipside doesn't support your chain, you then need to actually pay them and integrate the data yourself. So on Ethereum, this is okay, they support Ethereum, but building out this dashboard and infrastructure is another thing we need to do as a dApp developer, which is kind of outside of being a developer, right? You're basically negotiating with suppliers. You're now building a business that has 3 suppliers on top of your decentralized network. Now, what happens in general, and the experience that our customers often have, is that a subgraph is great for like summary level information, but kind of starts to fall over after a little while, especially as the protocol gets older, bigger, etc. We've seen that in like PancakeSwap on Binance, for example. It's basically impossible to get the data for that. So you end up building a custom indexer, right? But you just wanted to build a lending market. You didn't want to build a custom indexer, right? This is a very different skill set. And if you are, say, on a chain like Polygon, you're going to need to deal with block reorganizations, which could be like 200 blocks, right? So reality is going to shift underneath you. Now, I don't know how many people here have tried to build an indexer before. They start simple, and then they end up in a really horrible place. So there's some good hands up there. So yeah, great. Well, this is good. I'm speaking to the right people. And really, this was my history in crypto of building custodians, trading platforms, merchant-scale wallets. The problem wasn't necessarily just in the execution. It was in the data, that we couldn't get the data, right? Especially for things like Bitcoin, which have very poor support for data. Now, you started on one chain. That was bad enough. But now you're on 3, right? So if you're SushiSwap, you're on like 16, right? How much infrastructure is this, right? You're now having to hold in your hand, manage and things. And you know, if you want to become a DAO one day, now you need to synchronize this all through a DAO, right? Some of these things don't take tokens yet. Although I must say in RPC, very excited to see that some of the more decentralized solutions are starting to come to fruition, like Pocket Network, and there are others as well. But this kind of complexity is hard. These chains have different block numbers. Maybe their timestamps don't line up, right? They've got different data, different Oracle solutions. Maybe you need to implement multiple because Optimism has a different Oracle than Ethereum. So, you know, now you're increasing your smart contract complexity. I think the point I'm trying to make here is that your complexity is always increasing, right? It's not decreasing. And the scale of this, where you need so many users to earn money for your protocol, but you also have to pay kind of huge fees on the other side, for something that started as, well, I can just deploy a smart contract for a few $100s and build my dApp, has turned into, I need a business, I need a COO, I need like a finance person. You know, there's a whole host of things you need to build around you, a whole lot of infrastructure, be it people infrastructure or physical infrastructure, in order to support your application and to make it usable and to provide good user experience, right? Because if we want to get crypto used more, we need to get that UX kind of stuff down. And right now, dApps take 20 seconds to load, which is just mental. So a real-life derivative exchange, you know, kind of looks like this, where on the left you can kind of see RPC, custom indexer dashboard that's all connecting to this chain with your smart contract, and then kind of the oracle that's like pushing into the chain on the other side. And so you have to have these, like, manage this relationship between all these different things. Now, a real common problem is, this happens a lot in derivatives markets, is the oracle is used as what's called the liquidation price, which is not the price you see on your screen. The price you see on your screen could be from somewhere else, and often is from somewhere else. So there's been many examples where one price was here, the oracle price was here, you put in your trade, and you're immediately liquidated, especially if you're at a high multiplier, like 200 times leverage or whatever, which, you know, degens do these things fairly regularly. So that mismatch in data, that poor expectation setting, is a really serious problem, right? Imagine if you were making, like, if you were a large financial institution making a trade, and your trade settled at a different and unexpected rate, which was not relative to the market. Like, you are going to be not happy, right? And you're probably going to start suing people. In crypto, it's just like, oh, it was a technical issue, or, yeah, sometimes they get a bit out of sync. It's like, okay, probably not the future of finance we're building if that's the case. So there's a serious disadvantages to this kind of setup, right? So we've got increased time to market, right? We started really simple, and now we've had to recruit more and more people, more and more complexity, more and more infrastructure. Right? We've had to make multiple negotiations with lots of different partners. We've had to talk to humans on this decentralized network. So now there's a human factor as well in this. Right? You need to be on Telegram all the time to talk to people, which is annoying. And after all of this, we've got bad user experience, right? Because we've got inconsistent data from different sources. This is a real serious problem. And, you know, I think it's one that we're hoping to address in some ways, but I think we need to look at how we lay kind of Frankenstein monsters tech stack to rest. So I think there's some key principles that we as infrastructure providers can take to basically help projects instead of kind of getting in their way or gatekeeping access to data or having to make you sign giant deals in order to get anything, etc. So one of those ways is to make it permissionless. So permissionless is a really key concept which Ethereum itself, Bitcoin itself, etc. keeps. If you have the token, you can use the network. We can't stop you, right? This is a key principle. Most of the infrastructure does not adhere to this principle. And in fact, some infrastructure projects, their token doesn't have any relation to the actual infrastructure they provide. And actually, that infrastructure is paid for in dollars, in contracts, off-chain. So, you could question maybe what the purpose of those tokens actually are. But having a token gate only for your network, to have like an unstoppable network that's per se providing RPC, which you can pay for in token, this is a way that we can alleviate some of these problems. We can economically align, and we can use some kind of economic principles to build our dApps instead of kind of corporate, standard business development type ways. The other one is verifiability. So the provenance of data is something that's really lacking. So when you actually use a dApp, often if they're using a custom indexer, or even if they're pulling from RPC, your computer is not verifying that data, right? Unless you're using a light client, which is an option. People are trying to ram light clients into the web browser, which is super cool. I fully support things like Helios initiatives and things. But 99% of users, they're using MetaMask, etc. The data they see on their screen is from a trusted party. You're not operating trustlessly, right? So again, a key principle of crypto, verifiability of the data you're seeing, the transactions you're seeing, etc. Now, I'll add a really good example, which I do as well, which is really terrible, is that we use Etherscan to check. Etherscan is a source of truth. That is not unstoppable. That is not decentralized. It's a great public service, and they've done amazingly well, but I don't want to rely on them for data. I don't want to rely on them for all of crypto's data, right? Not to mention they're kind of expensive for chains. Some of those deals are eye-watering. So I mentioned already, but you really can't rely on infrastructure that can be taken down. So when you're selecting your key infrastructure providers, your RPC providers, etc., you need to look at where their risks are, right? Do they have a centralized load balancer that you need to access all this data from, right? Even if they have a token, right? Superchain today, you need to trust Superchain Labs, you need to trust me. One day you need to not trust me, and I won't even be able to take down Superchain, right? This is the aim. But it's very difficult to build things this way, right? But instead, it's going to be really difficult for dApp developers to build anything decentralized. So you kind of have to pick your battles. Unstoppable systems, unstoppable data, this is a key tenet of how we need to build in the future. We can't just kind of keep pushing things to be centralized. And products like Uniswap, they recently released a great new user experience which involved them removing any semblance of decentralization. They removed the graph, they removed all dependencies, they now have their own centralized API that isn't even open source. So although Uniswap the contracts, sure, it's open source, it's on-chain, v3, v2, these are easy to use. But the reality of actually trading on Uniswap, which often involves hopping between multiple pools, evaluating different chains, etc., that's something that is going to be difficult without some kind of API, whether that be 1inch, Uniswap's own API, or some other third party. There are some interesting takes on this as well, like intents and things, which would definitely think a decentralized intent system could be very interesting to solve some of these issues. See, I've got a fan there for decentralized intents, not centralized intents. I do want to differentiate between those two things. Soon, TM, okay. Yeah, so unstoppable systems are really key. We need to kind of stop this re-centralization of things in the name of like, oh, user experience and things, when the user experience isn't even getting that much better. So what we do, very briefly is we're building this verified and transparent data to try and address this. But we don't want to just be on our own. We want to have everyone else help and build more decentralized applications. We don't want to kind of be the only ones trying to build data infrastructure or infrastructure for supporting dApps. We need way more stuff than this. We need user experience, UI frameworks, ways to submit on RPC in decentralized ways. No, there's a ton of stuff that needs to be done that's not just the data at Superchain, but can be used everywhere else. So, we feel that we've been able to squeeze a lot of the complexity into one place that's verifiable. But, there's a lot of other complementary services that need to be around this for this all to work really, really well. So yeah, follow me and message me, and we'll fix crypto together. So I think, do we have some time for questions? Cool. So, any questions, put your hands up, please. Tell me why I'm wrong. I think there's a gentleman up there. Oh yeah, I can see you now.
So you mentioned the idea of unstoppable data. It would appear to me that a lot of the data now with subgraph and indexing happens off-chain because it's very difficult to process all of this on-chain. What approach do you think could allow this to become unstoppable? Would there still be off-chain elements, or what do you see?
Sure, I think that's a really good question. There's a few approaches. So you can use zero knowledge to verify state from other chains, for example. So that's quite like a thin slice. So you can probably read like one or two properties like that. But you could have a smart contract. I think there's Herodotus, I think, is one of these solutions. So zero knowledge, I think, can help, especially where you are trying to do things within smart contracts, which need a small amount of data, a small amount of processing power. Obviously, there's an off-chain component to that in terms of building the proof, unless that's natively done within a chain with something like RISC-0. But there's a lot of like tech buzzword bingo that would have to come together to kind of build a very comprehensive solution. We've chosen to do something a bit differently, where it's not on Ethereum chain. We're adding a data infrastructure layer, so another layer, unfortunately, but at least we're replacing some of them. But we have standard consensus. So we have a deterministic data platform, which we built in-house from scratch, which lets you verify that without zero knowledge and things. So it's like way cheaper to run on commodity hardware. That's our approach, but I don't think it's the only one. I think zero knowledge has got a lot of legs, especially where you don't want to know the underlying data. You just need the proof. Things like Fuel Network are particularly interesting, where they're like building UTXO sets and stuff, but they don't know the inputs. They just know the hashes. So there's definitely some legs on the zero knowledge side as well. Any other questions? James, the man with the best name.
Yo, thank you for a great session there, James. Just a quick one there. You mentioned with Uniswap kind of going to their sort of closed code, pivot, shall we say. What do you think the risks of the space, of more players in the space doing that, and how can we kind of counteract that happening? Obviously, Superchain is on this kind of crusade to do it, but I just worry that with big players in the game doing this, what does that mean for the space really moving forward?
Yeah, so I think that the economic incentive is huge, because if you have a fee switch in your UI, as Uniswap does, you're going to want to be moving as many people to your user experience as possible. So I think that if I were Uniswap, I'd be doing exactly what they're doing based on their shareholders and who they ultimately are responsible to. I think that there's two sides of this. One is the fact there is competition in terms of like DeFi Llama has a swap aggregator, so an aggregator of aggregators. So you can like compare like CowSwap and Uniswap's own routing and stuff, which is really good. So that helps reduce the fees. But I think the repercussions are basically there will always be a fee, and that fee will be raised to the bottom to some extent. But because there's still a moat in terms of the data, like 1inch, for example, the advantage they have is the biggest data warehouse of everything, including all their historical transactions and intentions and the actual resulting trades, right? So that's actually a useful data set that they have. Providing access to that data will help commoditize routing and other more complex operations for the user to do. So yeah, I think it's like not the worst thing in the world, what's happening with Uniswap, but I think that it's definitely the wrong thing because obviously that's such a big brand and things that, we're now pushing more people towards a centralized experience with a fairly large moat, especially without it being open source, which to be honest, I was pretty surprised at. Maybe they'll actually open source it at some point, but right now it's their old one that's there, which is dependent on the graph, which is not really maintained anymore.
Yeah, because so V2 is dependent on the graph still, and then V3 is just moated like that, is that right?
No, so Uniswap's new APIs support all of the previous versions, V2 and V3, but the subgraphs I don't think that they're maintaining anymore. So their old like open source API, which uses subgraphs, I mean it'll be quite a bit slower and a bit more difficult to use. We've tried it internally. It's not too much fun to run.
All right, thanks, James.
Okay, so my question would be, how much of this, because a large majority of what has to be accomplished is sort of data indexing and data processing, so how much of this can be reliably pushed to the edge, to the client?
That's a good question. I think like with browsers now, it's starting to get more fun, so I'm actually really, really excited about modern technologies like Web GPU, which is a way of doing compute on GPUs in web browsers. Now you may think, why on earth are you telling me about that? That's completely irrelevant to crypto. Well, I'm telling you because let's take a very simple example like the total volume traded on a swap. If you have that data in the browser, which now browsers can store things on disk, you can use GPUs to very quickly do maths. So you're able to calculate, like, add up all the volume for a thing pretty much instantly, even on a mobile phone. A mobile phone being a much more restrictive environment. So for me, I think these aggregations can start happening on device, which is really, really exciting because it's very easy to do verifiability at a data layer. It's very hard to do it at an aggregation and computation layer. That's what zero knowledge does, right? So that's like the really hard stuff that we deliberately avoided because we'd be a zero knowledge company and wouldn't do much else, right? Because it's a huge effort. So we deliberately went a different way. And then, yeah, we're going to be very heavy on the client side, actually. So yeah, I think that's one of the ways that we can help. But we have to do that efficiently. We have to do that in the right way. So things like Web GPU on mobile especially is going to be a necessity to do these kind of calculations quickly and provide that snappy user experience that is expected.
Okay, thanks.
I will try not to relate to the previous panel that you were on today, but you said that you want to make data unstoppable and that one day even you will not be able to stop it. Now we're seeing on one side, as your namesake James mentioned, what Uniswap is doing on one side, right? They're centralizing. How are you approaching this? Because you are not only providing the tools, as far as I understand, but you're also leading by example. So how does that work, and how are you going to make Superchain unstoppable and permissionless and all these different things that you mentioned?
All right, yeah, well, thank you. I'll give you your $50 later. Effectively, we've built something that takes blockchain data from nodes, makes it verifiable through, we have our own database, basically we produce files. If you run it, I run it, we produce the same data. That basically is a very easy thing to decentralize because you can just hash those files. So we could just use any Ethereum type network, have the hashes of the files that we made, share those, come to consensus on those. Okay, 5 people said the Uniswap v2 toolbox for this block range was this hash. Does everyone agree? Yes. You lied, go away, right? Very simple consensus mechanisms, all the same kind of security concerns as you'd have with standard POS. And then, yeah, built into that network. So we're going to start slowly. So we've basically proven that our product is actually useful to people. For example, working with Telos, who are one of the other sponsors here, like helping out some of their dApps, helping out some more derivatives exchanges on Fuel Network, for example. getting kind of high quality data from both the Oracle side and the order book side. So for us, delivering user requirements is the #1 priority, and then we're basically then able to decentralize this backend behind, because we have this light client, and that light client is what basically keeps the verifiability in. And we have some little tricks that, just to share a little bit of alpha, is that we are releasing something even before we build our network that will add verifiability to our data. So we can turn it off, but we can't lie. And also we get punished for turning it off too. So there's going to be like effectively, we call them guardians, who are able to help secure our network before we have a network even, because we think that's really important to keep ourselves honest.
Dobar dan, James.
Dobar dan.
Yeah, so I guess a little bit of a contrarian take, but as you know, I'm old and salty, and I really like my Bitcoin. There it is. My understanding is you guys have started doing some cool stuff with runes, and I just love to get your take on if you can expand a bit more on some of the stuff you're doing with Bitcoin.
Yeah, sure thing. So Bitcoin's extremely underserved in terms of data, and it's been now made infinitely worse by inscriptions, ordinals, runes, etc. But luckily, myself and my co-founder, some of the first data stuff we built in crypto before Superchain, about 5-6 years ago, was actually in Bitcoin. So as these things have become more popular, we've also had some great partners with Moonstruck, who are building some runes data, some runes terminals, some explorers, etc. You know, we've able to provide Bitcoin data with a similar level of verifiability to the rest of our data. So with runes, for example, and inscriptions, they all kind of have similar problems. So in EVMs, you have smart contracts. So if I try to send you $50, it will just fail on chain if I don't have 50 USDC, say. Whereas on Bitcoin, I can just say, I transferred you $50 of this inscription, and there's no verification at all. You have to trust the centralized service, because all the verification for ordinals, inscriptions, and runes is effectively an off-chain standard, although I wouldn't even call it a standard today. It's still evolving, and that's a nice way of saying it's a bit random how it's implemented. Like, for example, we actually have to make a silly decision, which is if you minted 1,000 of an inscription and you put a comma in it, is it valid or not? Because it's not a number anymore, according to a computer, but obviously a human being will look at that and go, yeah, of course it's 1,000, but it doesn't parse as a number. So we have to, and we have to check other people's implementations to see, what's the truth here, basically, and come to some kind of consensus around that. So yeah, that's kind of what we're up to with runes. So we're releasing basically inscriptions, ordinals, and runes data from Bitcoin pretty soon. So. Anyone else for any other questions? I can't see you very well, so. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for your time and attention. Appreciate it.